for the past 15 years and has worked in several areas of the department over that time. Prior to joining the ECCB, he worked as an economist at the Ministry of Finance and Economy in Antigua and Barbuda. He received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in economics from the University of the West Indies. His main areas of research are financial stability and development and macroprudential policy. He also has a deep interest in big data analytics and machine learning and their application to economic problems. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. Hodge to the floor and the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's panel discussion. The topic for this afternoon is generative AI for central bank. Once again, good afternoon, colleagues. Apologies. I trust that everyone had a good lunch, and none of us are suffering from post-consumption fatigue. So, having listened to our previous two discussions earlier today, which focused heavily on the discussion on resilience, we're now moving into the second aspect of the conference theme, which is innovation. And this afternoon we have a panelist which is comprised of three highly esteemed persons, in the persons of Miriam Hajiji, Hans Ginsberg, and Maria Frazzi. I'll just give a brief overview of their bios. I'll start with Miriam first. Miriam is currently the Director of Data Science at the Bank of Canada, and in this role, she is responsible for the vision and development and execution of strategies related to data and advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as frontier technologies applicable to macroeconomics and central banking. She works with the departments across the bank to ensure timely, robust analysis and insight is delivered towards the bank's objectives. Ms. Hajiji also holds a PhD in mathematics from the University of Ottawa. She also has extensive experience in interdisciplinary leadership and strategic innovation, and prior to joining the bank, she advanced key files in a variety of economic sectors to deliver tangible business value. Her career has encompassed work in public and private domains, in aviation, aerospace, safety, security, healthcare, and finance over many years. We now move on to give an overview of Hans. Hans is currently Professor of Economics at the Asia School of Business and is the Senior Director of Central Banking and Finance Program. He has published considerably on issues related to exchange rate regimes, reserve management, capital markets development, having worked in a senior roles at the South Asian Central Bank Research and Training Center, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and the IMF. Hans is has an extensive academic experience, having been Professor of International Economics from 1979 to 2008, and Head of the International Economics Department from 1989 to 1998 at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Hans holds a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. And lastly, Maria. Maria is team lead and IT project manager for supervisory technologies and data section at the European Central Bank. Her experience extends to driving innovation in diverse industries, including the financial sector, leveraging emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and data analytics to enhance regulatory processes. Maria holds an MSc in Electronic and Computer Engineering, as well as an MSc in Production Engineering and Management, with a background in project management, data management, and risk management. She has a successful track record of leading technical projects for the European Insurance and Occupation Pensions Authority, Eurostat, and the European banks and insurance companies. We do give apologies for Maria, who is running a bit late, so she'll join us a bit late. So as we culminate or get into our session this afternoon, we start by just asking Miriam to give us a brief overview of exactly what is generative AI and how it functions. Of course, we are now familiar with the term generative AI, and most of us are familiar with ChatGPT, but how does it exactly work? I think we have a lot of people who are we have persons who are for, and we have a lot of persons who have significant apprehensions, but I think now is the time to pause and reflect and get a better understanding of exactly what is generative AI.
Thank you very much. This is on.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start by thanking the organizers of this wonderful conference, ECCB, and all the wonderful colleagues of all the central banks, and of course the central banking group for organizing their autumn meeting here in this beautiful island. So my first time here, thank you very much for the opportunity. Now, I'm going to go a little bit before generative AI and start with AI and generative AI. And there was a session earlier in the FinTech line this morning. So if you were there, part of this will be a repeat for you. Apologies. But essentially, so what is generative AI? So generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that has the capability to generate texts, images, videos, sounds even in some cases, that are similar to the real text and images and content that we have in our work. So how does it do that? So as I said, it's a technology based on fundamentals of artificial intelligence. It's nothing new. It did explode with the introduction of ChatGPT and all the rest in the news and the world, but really it is not something that is super new if you've been following the technology. In fact, AI itself is not new. The concept started in the 1960s in Dartmouth College, where a group of researchers envisioned this world where you have machines that can compute and produce predictions and decisions in a similar fashion as humans think. That was their view, that was their vision. Now that was in the 1960s, and they didn't have all the fabulous technology that we have today. So they were not able to actually make that vision happen or implement it. It took this many decades. Back in the 90s, we were doing research. I distinctly remember I was at the university doing research and teaching around neural networks. So those are foundations of artificial intelligence. And even then, it was still difficult, and part of it was lack of data. Now, what has happened that made this possible today with generative AI is that the past 20 years or so, all the search engines and all the content that we've put on World Wide Web and the internet, all of that that's become available, that can be leveraged to train these, what they call foundational models, large language models, so that they learn the body of knowledge that's made available to them. And then using techniques from artificial intelligence to generate text, responses, images that are real looking, real in quotations, similar to what we know of. It's important to note that these models been trained, this technology been trained on this historical data. So it knows up until what you trained it on. So as an example with ChatGPT, at least the previous versions, it was trained on all the data, as an example, Russia-Ukraine war. So it will not have any knowledge of that. So it's almost like you stop their training at a certain point and it continues. Now, can it be retrained and all that? Of course, but there's a lot of resources involved to doing that, and it's complex in that sense of trying to get this. But bottom line, it's a technology that's available under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, which also includes machine learning and includes all sorts of other variations. Like any other technology, it has benefits and it has risks, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So, we're all very familiar with ChatGPT, but as you said, since the introduction of ChatGPT, there's been a slew of other AI tools that have come to market. I think for many of us in this room who are currently using, let's say, Microsoft 11 at this moment, Microsoft has introduced Copilot into both Bing, which is a search engine, as well as Microsoft suite of products. What are your views in terms of the other AI tools that have come to market since ChatGPT? This is open to any one of the panelists.
Well, let me back off a little bit and first of all say, as your introduction implied, I'm a macroeconomist, but have also an interest in education, capacity building, and therefore, as many people remind me, I might become obsolete, and as AI takes over training, and so I try to keep up. And one thing which I did for this, just partly for fun, is to ask GPT, what does, the exact question was, how will generative AI change central banking? And I got a list of 10 areas. Or nowcasting for that matter. But it also talked about economic research and forecasting, or economic research more generally, namely that AI can generate models and simulations. It can do scenarios for the economy. And then, of course, there's was mentioned of natural language processing and so on, scraping large amounts of data from the internet and draw conclusions from that. I'm probably an old fogey, but I get a little bit worried when I think that algorithms of this type can generate new models of economies and how they function based on the past. And I will, if I have a little bit more time later on, I can give you a little bit of an example from traditional econometrics, how that has evolved over time in response to the idea that old models were no good, therefore we need new ones, and essentially let past data speak, so to speak, and then we use that for guiding monetary policy. And most of what my interventions are going to be about is not central banking in general, but mostly about monetary policy aspect of central banking. Let me stop there for a moment.
I think that was a rather good segue into what would have been the next question, which would have been related to how would generative AI impact central banking going forward. We've already seen a number of central banks starting their journey into generative AI. We have the European Central Bank, we have the Bank of England, Bank of Singapore. Even recently, I was reading an article from the World Bank, and they've actually developed a version of ChatGPT for their institution, which they're having some trial runs in terms of seeing how best generative AI can impact the productivity of the institution. And I just wanted to hear from the panel, what are their views in terms of how generative AI will change the landscape of central banking going forward?
So maybe I'll start with that. That remains to be seen. However, what we know so far is that you could use generative AI in a central bank like any other organization, institutions could use. That is one use case. So for example, lots of institutions, in fact, lots of banks, not just central banks, but banks, are using generative AI to build chatbots, to help their call centers, help their staff with responses, to use generative AI to enable their employees to search documentation. So that's sort of like generic uses of generative AI that many institutions are trying to learn. And that's, of course, applicable to central banks as well. Now, more specifically to the roles of central banks, you can think about training a large language model on data sets that are pertinent to certain central banks, and then ask questions from them. So as an example, one of the issues that's often raised with generative AI is this concept of hallucination, that they may give inaccurate answers. However, if you custom train a large language model, and that is not an easy task to do, granted, but if you do that, then you can limit it to give you answers from the data set that you are training it on without lowering the risk of hallucinations or effectively eliminating that, because it will stick to the script of the data set that you provided. So that is something that can be done. As an example, to look up statistics from national statistical agencies, et cetera, build comparisons, ask the generative AI to build you charts and dashboards much faster than I could do. So it saves you time. It's an issue of efficiency and gaining productivity. The other one that goes back to efficiency and productivity, as an example, I was talking with some colleagues in the central banking community, and we were talking about leveraging generative AI within the context of supervision. So in supervision, the supervisors have to review often large stacks of documents, even to this date, in paper form or in PDFs, which is really difficult to do, and they have to actually distill that volume in very quick amount of time to a summary. So that is the kind of task that large language models, generative AI, are excellent at doing that. So can we as a central banking community gain some efficiencies into doing that better, that job better, and help our supervision task? So those would be the examples. If you get close to the territory of trying to ask a generative AI to provide a forecast that you use in policy, in monetary policy or decision making, I'm not so sure. That's probably not a good idea or a good use case for the technology, at least yet. That's where I'm thinking that would be the kind of best use cases. But of course, you need to put guardrails in place. You need to, train your staff to train the generative AI model. So there is still quite a bit left for us to learn and journey ahead of us.
If I may may add to that something that you actually said this morning downstairs. The other area which I think AI can be very good at is fraud detection in various aspects of payments and so on, which I was reading part of a 1,000-page BIS report on machine learning in central banking, which came out last year by the Irving Fisher committee, and they emphasized that. One of the things they emphasized was that aspect. So I think with the availability of huge amounts of data, so-called big data, you need some form of machine learning, call it AI or whatever, in order to be able to analyze them. And if I may pick up on the forecasting problem, and do a little bit of a historical background. In about 40 years ago, and again, happy birthday, ECCB. About 40 years ago, professor of econometrics, Chris Sims, wrote an article called Macroeconomics and Reality. And he was saying the current models current models of economies were no good because they imposed all sorts of restrictions which were not reliable. And so he proposed a new method, and now that's standard so-called vector autoregressions. And those are linear, very data-driven models. And they became very popular for a while. But they weren't picked up so much in central banks as guiding policy. Why? Because they couldn't be easily related to economic modeling, economic models and behavior of individuals. So in the subsequent 20, 30, 40 years, econometricians, macroeconomists who use those sort of techniques, what they did was to add elements to these data-driven models, which made them interpretable in terms of what people thought were our reasonable behavioral assumptions. So, and I think AI might go in the same possibly direction, in the sense that currently they are good at forecasting things. They probably do better than standard linear models because they take into account nonlinearities. But they are hard to interpret. But there are now efforts to make AI model interpretable. And therefore, maybe in another 20 or maybe 40 years, for the next anniversary conference, we will have models, AI models of economies which are interpretable and can be used very well for standard monetary policy, in addition to all the things that they can be used for in other aspects, supervision, fraud detection, all that, also interpreting language on various reports and so on.
Good afternoon, Maria. How are you? I see that you've joined us now.
Good afternoon. My apologies, although the organization team made a great effort to make sure that the connection will work and everything will be set up properly. Despite this great effort, we had some issues. I'm really glad to join you today, and I have the opportunity with you in this great remotely.
Okay, thank you. Did you hear any of the discussion that took place just a while ago?
No, unfortunately, I joined 2-3 minutes ago.
Okay. All right, no problem. So we were basically at the juncture of discussing the impact of generative AI and its implications and how it could be used within the context of central banking. So we've already heard from Miriam and Hans. Would you happen to have any views on that topic?
Yeah, sure. So in my area, I lead a team of engineers, these people that they are the supervision at the Euro system, Europe, with new technologies. And since this year, it was the first time I can say that there was so much appetite from the business area to explore a new technology. This technology, as you have already started to discuss about it, is the generative AI. So already in November last year, there were a lot of references in the media all over the place about ChatGPT. And then the supervisors, they started to approach us and they were asking to identify ways to explore this new technology. I can share with you some of the examples or the use cases that we started the early experimentation. And one of those, it is to support supervisors that they don't have technical knowledge of querying a complex data model on the reporting framework that we are using here in Europe. So they asked us whether the use of large language models can support them in order to query the way this complex data model. We were glad that we started with this use case. It allows us to experiment without having any obstacle with regards to protection or security. The reason for that was that this data model is publicly available in the European banking community. So we managed to overcome these years of security or data protection, as I told you, and the results are quite promising. After 6 weeks of experimentation, we managed to prove that we can use OpenAI services in particular in order to query this complex data model and produce from natural language, from English, SQL statements, so technical statements that can be used by supervisors in order to query data in an easy way. Another example that we started early experimentation was to create a chatbot, again with the use of OpenAI services, in order to support the query of regulatory text and methodologies. So again, this example refers to publicly available data that the supervisors have to consult very often, and they have to dig into hundreds of pages of legal text. So now with the use of large language models, they can simply use plain English and they can get in a matter of seconds the results that they are looking for. But this is just the beginning. There are a lot more of appetite for text summarization, text drafting, and also areas of transcribing minutes and making presentation that makes sense. Definitely a lot of appetite and a lot of potential out of technology.
All right, thank you very much, Maria. And you're referring to ECB's Team Infinity project.
I'm referring to the ECB, but also to the SAP initiative. So SAP stands for Advisory Technologies, and since 2021, we started to explore the use of artificial intelligence in different areas in supervision. At the same time, the Infinity team is supporting central banking functions like monetary policy, financial stability, So we have basically two teams that are supporting innovative activities at the ECB and the supervisory mechanism.
All right, thank you. As I listened to the discussion, one of the things that came out from both Hans and Miriam was the issue of hallucination by AI models. I think there are some additional concerns there, especially as it relates to embedded biases, the opaqueness, of course, as Hans mentioned, as well as data privacy and security issues. So for a central bank that's thinking about, moving into the space of using generative AI for its operations, what would be an appropriate governance framework that should be put in place to help, a central bank to develop such a project?
So maybe I'll start with this, and maybe Maria has to add. I don't know about appropriate, but I tell you what we have started doing at the Bank of Canada. And I was actually mentioning this in a conversation with your colleague here at the ECCB. I was talking with Sibel, and there she is. And I was saying, 3 years ago or so, I was going around our central bank trying to talk to people and saying, like, this question of ethics of AI and responsible AI and fairness and bias and all of this is really important. I'm not saying people wouldn't listen, but they had other things on their mind.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2-3 years, now it has become the hot topic. So in some ways, I am glad that people are noticing this as an important topic for us to consider about the risks around these technologies that can so help with efficiency and productivity gain, et cetera. So we started, we started a while back. We formed a committee, call it Responsible AI Advisory Committee, and that has key management from different groups at the Bank of Canada as part of that committee. So as an example, we have from our research team, we have from our communication team, we have from our legal and privacy team, we have from our audit group, from our payments, we have from our IT, and from our data office. And I'm probably missing a couple of other people, but that's sort of like the key stakeholders in this context. And then, so that's the advisory committee. And then there is a working group formed of folks who are more hands-on in terms of testing the ChatGPT, Google Bard, related technology, large language models in general. And together, they put together a set of guidelines for Bank of Canada staff to abide by in terms of when we want to use these tools and technologies, what to do. The general would be, things like don't put sensitive data in it, double check the information, make sure, because there are also not just hallucination, but there are issues with copyright infringement, as an example, because they're gathering information from wherever and you don't know exactly where the source is. Legal, cybersecurity issues, et cetera, et cetera. So a set of guidelines we've created. And then along with the guidelines, we're in the process of creating some preliminary training. So we have done some introductory training for all bank staff, and now we're going to more technical level, like prompt engineering workshops and things like that for those who are interested. And we're also building a risk management framework as the next steps following that as to how to put metrics and measures and guardrails in place going forward, and how do we report back in terms of how these work as an institution. So it's a journey. as I mentioned earlier, it started very grassroots, but it has grown partially due to the large interest externally in the news and social media, but also partially because of the potentials of the technology. And as you mentioned, rollout of Microsoft Copilot, other technologies within Bing, but also outside in Google and OpenAI and work of other central banks and interest from the community.
Right.
If I may just add a little bit to that from the educational area. Students, of course, and faculty member, they're all worried about how AI is going to, how they can use that in their courses and so on. I tell my students, feel free to use AI, but whatever you write, you're responsible for it. And I think that's an important to remember, because it relates to the hallucination, but more generally to the possibility that AI doesn't come up with the right answers. So experts may know the right answer, and if you write something else from the central bank, you're in trouble. And therefore, it has to be, whoever uses it in their work has to be realized that they're ultimately responsible for the content. So I think that is something to remember. And I think more generally, AI can be a fantastic source of information and help in sifting through large amount of data. But I think it was Daniel Kahneman apparently said AI can do a lot better than humans can do in certain things, but AI plus humans can do a lot better than AI alone. And I think that's important to remember, that it can be a superb tool, but you have to add to it. You have to make sure that you understand where it comes from, the answers and the models and the forecasts or whatever. And that's where expertise and knowledge of the subject matter comes in.
I couldn't agree more that the power of AI is that it can make us more productive, more efficient. So also in our discussions here at the ECCB, we identify areas that the use of AI can support us on early drafts, for example, treasury assessments, risk. The colleagues that can benefit from can be produced by AI tools, but then the subject matter expert is the one who has to assess the information provided by AI and come up with a final assessment. Also share with you what we have started doing. The ECB, it is Miriam described it. So we are there, we explore, yes, we try to bring together different stakeholders, business interested, but also the data protection, the security, cybersecurity, architecture, etc. We also monitor closely the progress that is done here in Europe with regards to the AI Act. So we have a legal framework established here, and it's the foundation about like trustworthy and explanatory AI. Still, we have to understand that in our tools, in our implementation. I can say it is an excellent basis. Also, we invest a lot on awareness of our training. So we started enough with academia and the institutions like INSEAD in Paris and MIT. We also have a partnership with Applied AI, a company here in Germany that is one of the advisor bodies of the European Commission on AI and generative AI topics. Because it is more important than ever that the users of generative AI are aware of the bias of the how we can use potential. We also monitor closely the developments by the vendors. So, for example, we have this partnership with AI, and they try to put several in order to avoid biases, in order to avoid hate speech, etc. We haven't established a final governance model. In 2 weeks' time, we go to the executive board with a proposal. Earlier this year, even President Lagarde was interested in the mandate to start testing and experimenting. So we work pretty much in parallel, and we also work on establishing a risk management that will allow us to use it in a safe manner.
All right. Thank you very much, Maria. We're running a little bit late this afternoon. I wanted to, allow the audience to ask a few questions. So I would conclude my questions for the afternoon. And I know we would like for it to go on, but we really can't. So I'll just open up the floor for discussion. Please, when you ask your questions, please your name and the institution which you're representing. So we'll take the questions 2 at a time.
May I ask a question?
Sure, Hans.
Both of you are leading the teams of AI teams in your respective central banks. How many people do you need in a central bank who are really well versed in the technology, background technology, and how you can use them, how you can apply them, how you can generate your own use cases, and so on and so forth? Is it a huge department, huge cost, and so on?
Okay, so I think the answer is it depends. It depends on many factors. It depends on the size of your central bank. It also depends on the blend of staff that you have in hand. So if you have people who can effectively translate a business problem, a central banking problem, into technical language, then you are halfway there, because that piece of translation is actually quite challenging to do. And that is not necessarily a technical AI expert. That is not who you need for that work to happen. That you need someone who is well versed in the business, yet had some foundation of the technology in that sense. Then, of course, you need a team that the size can vary. It doesn't need to be large. We were actually chatting during the lunch as we were walking with the former governor of the Bank of Kenya, and he was telling me how he had this vision of putting together a group of data scientists, and how it's grown, and how that group has brought a different way of looking at the problem. So it's not so much about the quantity, it's more about the quality. Also, it's more about having the people who can do the business translator. And most importantly of all, is about having the senior leadership of the central bank supports, the governors and deputy governors, and the senior management supports to actually make this happen. This is a question that I often get asked, and people say, oh, well, how did you make this work happen, or this project successful? It has to be the blend of the AI expertise or the data technical expertise, plus the business, plus the leadership backing and support that would be needed to make it happen, as opposed to focusing necessarily on the numbers. Of course, then depending on the size of the team you have together, then you can prioritize and choose which project you pick. The larger team you have, the more you can do. smaller team, you have to prioritize. But that's, I think, in my view, secondary.
100% endorse, Miriam. Are there any?
I have a question. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jamaica, Bank of Jamaica to be specific. I would want to narrow the discussion from AI in central banks to AI in portfolio management, and get a sense, if possible, from you. We're in the explorative stage now, trying to ascertain what is the best AI tool out there that can give us credible information to assist us in this decision-making process. We also have a month-end portfolio rebalancing exercise that we go through. Interestingly enough, I've used ChatGPT, asking it what is the best portfolio tool. You'll be amazed at the results that it comes up with. It comes up with itself, as the best tool to use. I'm not so sure it provides the kind of credible information. It does. There's a level of efficiency that it provides, though, that is frightening. And as a consequence, it has serious implications for the organization and staffing, because we have an exercise, an optimization exercise that would take perhaps a day or half a day at the end of the month in order to reposition the portfolio on the efficient frontier. The exercise that we did took like 5 minutes, so instead of having 4 members of staff working on it, we'll probably end up with 2, or 1. But instead of, we are all here as central bankers, instead of individually, we are going through a process of trying to ascertain what is the best AI tool for portfolio management. Perhaps in your experience and your expertise, you can save us the effort and the work of, sifting through all that fluff and give us a definitive tool or two to work with. Thank you.
I just react to that, not really give an answer, but sort of speculation, if you wish. And that is, what would happen if machine learning AI tools became very much used in the financial markets in general? And if everybody, I'm going to an extreme, of course, start using more or less the same models, because that's the industry standard, how will that financial system work? Will it be prone to very large swings as the models say the same thing to everybody and everybody heads in the same direction? I think that's where, just as an intellectual exercise, is interesting to think about. In fact, Gary Gensler, who's now the head of the SEC, wrote a paper along those lines once. And I think that is something to think about. But more practically, I think, again, I don't think there is the best model that fits everyone. It depends presumably a lot on your individual circumstances in your central bank, on your risk appetite, so to speak, and other considerations. And therefore, again, I think one can use AI to gather information from the financial markets, and you can get a lot of information sorted out through using these methods. And then my sort of gut feeling is that it would be better to make your decisions on your own, having that information available, rather than relying on trading strategies proposed by algorithms of various types.
Okay.
If I may,
You wanted to come in, Maria?
if I can add, and there is, if there is time, yes, I would like to contribute on that. So first, even if we use the same model, a different prompting might lead to different output. So this is why the prompting engineering becomes more important than ever. Then with regards to the question, what is the best tool? It really depends. Depends on the particular requirements that you have as a central bank. For example, it's a very dynamic area. Even if you take the studies from Gardner and those, they are changing every 3 months, every quarter. What is important to assess it is the accuracy of these models. What we have seen so far is that many of the open source models, they don't bring the accuracy of ChatGPT, for example. Another constraint that at least we have, it is the geographical location that the deployment of these models takes place. So we have a preference, for example, for models that are deployed in the European region. This is another constraint to keep in mind. And what is going to be the potential implication on staffing? I believe we should be confident here because indeed AI can do certain things much faster, but this allows us more time to allocate our staff on other activities that were not able to take over before.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, colleagues, and then we'll have to wrap up. And we have a question from the gentleman at the back here.
Thank you, Patrick Jiroge, former governor, Central Bank of Kenya. Really, it's a comment more than a question. For most of the people in the room, we are central bankers. Okay, so I do appreciate the questions about ChatGPT, all those other AIs. But actually, some of our supervised institutions are already using AI. And maybe it's not GDP, whatever it is. I'm stuck with GDP. I'm an economist like yourself. We are dinosaurs. We are the ones that are going to be kicked out, right? No, and I can say this about Kenya because what I'm going to say is in public domain already. So some of our supervised institutions, we encouraged them to work on the SMEs, medium and small size enterprises. And so they actually produce some models and AI sort of models that would provide decisions on lending to those institutions. And actually the models were pretty good, as they told us, right? Because the credit officers were, now not tell you the specifics, but the credit officers were ranking at about 70%. And the models actually came up to 60%. So they were pretty good compared to the credit human beings, right? The problem is that ourselves as central bankers, you need to ask yourself, what happens to the 10%? Are you excluding, and how are you going to deal with these people eventually? So the human side of it is important. And then there was the issue of creating what appears to be plausible data and then working with that. So let's say you have data on teachers, you have data on nurses, but you don't have data on farmers. So you use the data on teachers and nurses. After all, farmers are more or less like nurses, right? So and then you create data that you then use to lend to farmers. The problem, I think, is obvious. What happens there? I mean, farmers are really different from all this. The point I'm making is we will be seeing more and more of those type of products because, as I see, the sort of largest commercial banks, will be using AI to produce these products, and they'll be pushed down to the various branches or subsidiaries around the world. So central bankers need to be much more awake because you need to question these models, and you cannot question them as an economist. I mean, really, we are out of our depth here. You need data scientists who are questioning them, and so you need to have data scientists who understand bank supervision and you can't get them like this. So I think there's a bigger task, aside from using it for our own purposes, internal purposes, there's a real big task that is coming. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and that brings us to the end of this afternoon's panel. First, I would like to thank you, the audience, for listening, and secondly, thank our esteemed panelists for their very robust discussions. And I'd like to just give them, join me in giving them a round of applause. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and let's give them a round of applause again. I hope you would agree with me that we've had 3 very interesting panels today. I loved the questions that came from the floor, the discourse, and a discourse that was so ably led by our moderators, Ms. D. Tracy Polius, Chief Director of Policy, Dr. Kevin Finch of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and now by Mr. Alistair Hodge here at the ECCB. We'd also like to extend thanks, of course, to our panelists, for without them, we wouldn't be able to have such a good engagement on critical issues for us as central bankers. Interestingly, we were joined not just by the people in the room here, but from my just checking online, a little over 700 persons viewed us online today, which is entirely impressive. So please give them a round of applause for the hard work that they put in today. So at this moment, I would like to bring this session to a close. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We ask that we're going to take a 15 or so minute break and allow the room to be switched up a little bit to move into the next session. Madam Master of Ceremonies, Michelle, would be returning to guide you through the rest of the proceedings this afternoon. So we invite you to have some coffee in the lobby, or juice, or water, and network with your fellow colleagues here. Thank you very much.